5 Formula One teams are trying to stop Ferrari before their car even touches the track in Monza. Not after a race. Not through a protest. Before the test even begins. Because what Ferrari is about to reveal is so aggressive, so unusual, that Mercedes and its allied teams are already pushing to block it. And here is the part most people are missing. Ferrari is not just fixing a weakness. They are trying to erase a power deficit of nearly 30 horsepower, with a concept no one else is using. A rotating rear wing. A completely redesigned floor. And a hidden development advantage that could unlock more engine performance mid-season. If this works, the championship order doesn't just change. It resets. And everything depends on what happens in a single test, behind closed doors. Ferrari didn't arrive at this moment by accident. Everything we're seeing now started with a problem they could not hide. In Australia, the first race of the season, the gap was already visible. Mercedes dominated. Completely. Ferrari finished behind, over 15 seconds off the lead, and that gap wasn't strategy. It wasn't tire management. It was raw power. And inside the team, they knew it. Because the data was clear. Corner speed was strong. Balance was there. The car could fight in the technical sections. But every time they hit a straight, they were losing. Consistently. Lap after lap. And that creates a dangerous situation. Because when your car is good, but not good enough, you face a choice. Accept the limit. Or take a risk. Ferrari chose the risk. But here's where things get more interesting. China looked like progress. On the surface, it was a success. Hamilton on the podium. A major emotional moment. A sign that things were improving. But underneath that result, there was tension. Because even in that race, Ferrari wasn't the fastest. They were surviving. Managing. Maximizing what they had. And internally, they already knew something else. McLaren was getting closer. Which meant Ferrari wasn't just chasing Mercedes anymore. They were about to be attacked from behind as well. And that changes everything. Because now the pressure doubles. You're not just trying to win. You're trying not to fall back. And then Japan happened. And this is where the story really shifts. Because Japan exposed the truth. No more illusions. No more optimism. Leclerc on the podium. Hamilton far behind. Same car. Same conditions. Very different outcome. Over 10 seconds between them. That's not strategy. That's not luck. That's performance. And after that race, something unusual happened. Hamilton said it publicly. Ferrari is not fast enough. Right now, they are the third team. Not first. Not second. Third. And when a driver like Hamilton says that, it's not frustration. It's a warning. Because he understands what comes next. If nothing changes, the gap only grows. The championship slips away early. And recovery becomes almost impossible. So Ferrari accelerated everything. Not weeks. Not gradually. All at once. A full development push in April. Multiple tracks. Fiorano. Mugello. And finally, Monza. But Monza is different. Because this is not just another test. This is the decision point. Everything they've been building, everything they've been hiding, everything other teams are now reacting to, gets validated here. Or it doesn't. And that's exactly why tension across the grid is rising. Because rivals have seen enough to worry. But not enough to understand. And when you don't fully understand something in Formula One, you assume the worst. You assume advantage. You assume risk. You assume someone might have found something you didn't. And that is when the pressure begins behind the scenes. Questions. Doubts. Concerns about legality. Concerns about safety. Concerns about intent. Not public. Not loud. But very real. Because stopping a rival before they gain momentum is always easier than catching them later. And right now, Ferrari is right on that edge. Not dominant. Not yet. But close enough to make everyone nervous. And what happens next depends on something very specific. Not the race. Not Miami. Not even the drivers. It all comes down to whether one system finally works the way Ferrari needs it to. There is one system, one single piece of engineering, that could decide everything. And almost no one fully understands how dangerous it could be. Because the moment it works properly, Ferrari stops playing defense. They start attacking. The system is called Macarena. And no, this is not just a clever name. This is a completely different way of thinking about speed. Most rear wings in Formula One do one thing. They create downforce. They push the car into the track. They give stability in corners. But Ferrari's concept breaks that logic. At high speed, the wing rotates. Not slightly. Not partially. Completely. Up to 180 degrees. In that position, it no longer behaves like a traditional wing. It reduces drag aggressively, which means more straight-line speed. But more importantly, it changes energy behavior. Because less drag means less resistance. And less resistance means the car can recover more energy. That energy goes back into the system, back into performance, back into lap time. And suddenly, that power deficit we talked about earlier doesn't feel as big anymore. But here's the problem. Actually, here's the real problem. The system has to reverse every single time before braking. And it has to do it perfectly. No delay, no hesitation, no error. Because if the wing is still in that low drag position when the driver hits the brakes, the car loses stability instantly. Rear grip disappears, balance collapses, and control becomes unpredictable. This is not theory. This already caused issues. Moments where the car didn't behave the way it should. Moments where drivers felt it. Moments where things almost went wrong. And in Formula One, almost is already too much. So now imagine the pressure. Ferrari is trying to perfect a system that gives them a massive advantage, but only if it works flawlessly. Otherwise, it becomes a liability. And this is exactly where other teams see an opportunity. Because they don't need Ferrari to fail completely. They just need this system to be questioned, to be reviewed, to be delayed. Because even a small delay kills momentum. And momentum is everything right now. But here's where things go even deeper. Because while everyone is focused on whether the system is safe, Ferrari is focused on something else entirely. Synchronization, timing, precision. The hydraulic system controlling that wing has to respond instantly. Every input, every corner, every braking zone, perfectly aligned with the driver. And according to what we know, that synchronization has been the biggest issue so far. Not the concept, not the design, the timing. Which means something very important. They are not far from making it work. They are close. Close enough to test it seriously in Monza. Close enough to scare rivals. And this is where the tension becomes real. Because if Ferrari solves that timing issue, everything else falls into place. Speed, efficiency, energy recovery. And suddenly, they are no longer chasing Mercedes on the straights. They are matching them. Maybe even beating them. And if that happens, then all the effort from rival teams to slow this down won't matter anymore. Because once something like this proves itself on track, you can't unsee it. You can't ignore it. You can only try to copy it. And copying takes time. Time Ferrari might not give them. So now the entire situation becomes a race. Not just between drivers. Not just between teams. But between development and reaction. Ferrari trying to make it work first. Rivals trying to stop it before that happens. And everything comes down to whether this system survives its most important test yet. Because if it does, then what we've seen so far this season was just the beginning. But here's the part that changes everything, and almost no one is talking about it. Even if the wing works, even if the aerodynamics improve, even if Ferrari suddenly becomes faster in corners and on straights, it still wouldn't be enough. Not against Mercedes. Not over an entire season. Because the real gap is still inside the engine. And Ferrari knows it. That's why, while everyone is distracted by what's visible on the car, they've been preparing something much bigger. Something that doesn't depend on one test. Something that doesn't rely on one component. Something built into the regulations themselves. ADUO. And this is where the story stops being technical and starts becoming strategic. Because ADUO is not just an upgrade. It's permission. Permission to fix a weakness during the season. Legally. And with fewer restrictions than anyone else. But there's a condition. Ferrari has to prove that they are behind. Not slightly. Significantly. They need to show that their engine deficit crosses a specific threshold. Around 4 to 6%. Which, based on current data, they already are. Now think about that for a second. Ferrari's biggest weakness could become their biggest opportunity. Because once that threshold is confirmed, everything opens up. They can redesign key elements of the power unit. Improve the combustion process. Increase efficiency. Extract more energy. Deploy it better. And suddenly, that gap of 20 to 30 horsepower starts shrinking. Not all at once, but enough to matter. Enough to change race outcomes. Enough to change the championship. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because this doesn't happen immediately. There's a process. Step 1. Miami. That's where the FIA collects the data. Real performance. Real comparisons. No simulations. No assumptions. Step 2. Evaluation. The FIA analyzes everything. Compares Ferrari to the benchmark. And makes a decision. Step 3. Approval. If Ferrari qualifies, They unlock development. Mid-season. Right when momentum matters most. And now the timeline becomes critical. Because Ferrari is not just preparing upgrades for Miami. They are preparing evidence. Everything they do, every lap, every data point, feeds into that decision. And this is exactly why other teams are watching so closely. Because they understand what comes next. If Ferrari gets a DUO, this is no longer the same championship. It splits into two phases. Before Miami, and after Miami. And in that second phase, Ferrari is no longer limited in the same way. They evolve faster. They improve more aggressively. They close the gap. And maybe, they go beyond it. Now combine that with everything else. A new floor. A potential breakthrough with the wing. And then, more power. That is not an upgrade. That is a reset. And this is why the reaction from Mercedes and the other teams makes perfect sense. Because they are not just trying to stop a part. They are trying to stop a sequence. A chain reaction. Because once it starts, it cannot be reversed. And here's the most important detail of all. Ferrari doesn't need everything to work perfectly. They don't need a miracle. They just need enough. Enough aerodynamic gain. Enough system stability. Enough improvement to stay close. Until ADUO activates. Because once it does, the real Ferrari shows up. Not the one we've seen so far. Something much more complete. Much more dangerous. And much harder to stop. So now the pressure is not just on Monza anymore. It's on time. On timing. On whether Ferrari can hold their position just long enough for their biggest weapon to become available. Because if they can, then everything we've seen so far will feel irrelevant. And everything that comes after will feel like a completely different season.